think that you will find today's lesson a bit different from the usual Sunday lesson. Those lessons typically contain inspiration and an element of education, and at the end kind of get tied up in a neat little bow. But my lesson today is more about questions. And I hope they're thought-provoking questions, discussion-provoking questions that will lead to further in-depth conversations and explorations. The origin of this letter is a trip that I took to Amsterdam in the Rhineland in 2019, where for the first time I was introduced at length to the works and the life of a man whose name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran minister who was jailed and executed by the Nazis for participating in a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. He sat in a solitary cell in Tegel prison in Nazi Germany, pondering how Christianity allowed Nazism and how it might confront a religionless world. While many German churches declared themselves Reich churches and swore allegiance to Hitler, Bonhoeffer started an alternative underground seminary. At one point, he accepted an invitation to teach at the Union Theological Seminary in New York City, an invitation that was extended to many academics to give them a reason and a venue to escape from Nazi Germany. After a semester in New York, he decided he needed to go back to Germany. He decided it was his duty to return to his country and bear witness to what he was seeing. He wrote letters and he made entries into a journal during his incarceration in which he described the religiousness age at which we had arrived. And he called for a religionless Christianity to evolve to meet the current times. He discussed the fact that Judeo-Christian concept of God is no longer able to speak to us. The world had changed. The phrase he used was the world had come of age, and we cannot any longer relate in any way, in any meaningful way, to the God that had been created in the Christian tradition. He further asked a question. Even if we establish the existence of a human-like God, what would make us think that this being is the traditional Judeo-Christian God, the God of Abraham? Bonhoeffer wrote at length about what seemed to be a reaction to the mythology of Christianity, the system of beliefs eventually codified into doctrines, and in some cases into dogma. This mythology, he posited, supposedly defines what Christians should, or at the dogma end, what Christians must believe in order to call themselves Christians. And he posed the question, could a thoughtful people demythologize the fundamental Christian message? Could we make that message relevant to the current human existence? Beyond outmoded systems of belief, whether biblical or doctrinal, was the fact that in a world in which Christians could so readily adapt to Nazism, even the traditional notion of inwardness and conscience was suspect. Unfortunately, he was hanged by the Nazis before he could fully develop his idea. He was clear, though, about what religionless Christianity would not look like. It would not be a Christianity that used the idea of a God to fill the gaps in human understanding. He railed against the notion of a God of the gaps. He thought that religionless, that's a hard word to say, religionless Christianity would be at the center of the village rather than at its borders. He thought and he hoped that Christianity would not be a religion at all, but rather something, somehow, a presence in a real secular world. For me personally, the only authentic reason to follow this path of questioning and reasoning is that I find it transformative. What that means is the subject of my own personal explorations and study. Because you see, like it or not, Jesus was a radical. And although some branches of Christianity have spent many, many centuries trying to transform his image into Mr. Moderate, nice guy, he certainly wasn't that. It's a sign of a new openness to Bonhoeffer's religionless Christianity that many people today now call themselves spiritual, but not religious. And so here's another question. Do you trust? Do you trust in a path of ongoing and evolving spiritual inspiration and transformation? Do you trust? The original meaning of the word faith. Do you trust in the process? There is no God and Mary as his mother is a quotation attributed to George Santayana, an American philosopher from the turn of the 20th century. He was a radical skeptic who nevertheless continued to find in the Roman Catholic Mass a source of profound inspiration. Some more questions. So why? Why should I care? Why religion at all? I'd like you to consider the possibility that Judeo-Christianity is on the verge of reinventing itself as something not explicitly Jewish or Christian, something in which the figures of Abraham and Jesus play a minor or possibly even a non-existent role. Can we probe the ethical values that these teachings hold? The golden rule, love and justice for all, humility, forgiveness, and the beloved community. Bill Zuckerman, in his book, Living the Secular Life, says that most contemporary secular people live by the golden rule. He also points out correctly that some variant of it occurs in many ancient texts from several different religions and secular sources. None of these versions requires a God. They just require basic human empathy. Perhaps the question no longer is, how can anyone possibly believe in a non-scientific metaphysical world? But rather, given the existential demand, where will we place our trust? And the question is, on what worldview, whether Christian, Jewish, non-Christian, whether religious or secular, are we willing to stake the meaning of our lives? How do we deal with what Paul Tillich calls the anxiety of emptiness and the meaninglessness of life? He suggests that emptiness stems from the fact that whatever gave us meaning yesterday no longer does, while meaninglessness is about the loss of ultimate concern, and it is experienced by us as a loss of the spiritual center, that place deep inside where we know that we know. So another question, what is the work? I think that the role of the inner life and inner work in morality, in religion, science, art, music, is to seek out another source of energy, an image of awe, that will reorient the way we naturally and self-centeredly see the world. A couple of years ago, I received a book as a gift. It has only pictures, no words. It is photos taken from the Hubble telescope. When I want an almost instantaneous transport to awe, I crack that book. What this work and the paths we use to explore it have in common is transcendence, rising above our own egos. In the words of the poet Anne Lamott, it is the not me. I love that, the not me. A shift in point of view, a change in how we see the world in an unself-centered way, and seek out another source of energy to help us live out our vision. The Christian scriptures report that Jesus spoke about the kingdom of God, and modern biblical scholars think that Jesus was talking about the sanctification of the here and now, not some far off place that's going to happen someday to the people who are good, but right here, right now, painting the picture of a kingdom among us. How a reformed society should work, how people should be treated, how the community should function. Walter Rauschenbach and others, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, they inspired the social gospel movement at the turn of the 20th century. This group of radical theologians and clergy emphasized that the kingdom of God of which Jesus spoke is a blueprint for radical social change and not simply a spiritual destination for individuals. We see this alive today as liberation theology, a movement that is expansive and thriving and vital in Central and South America, and to which the current Pope of the Catholic Church was an agent for change. You know, Matthew's gospel in the New Testament in chapter 25 says, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. And this chapter concludes with the words, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. The same notion of the kingdom of God on earth is the vision that underlies Martin Luther King Jr.'s religionless notion of the beloved community, a society based on love, but equally important on justice. Both King and Bonhoeffer's visions are of a kingdom of God in the world that demands not fine, mushy sentiments or religious separation from the world, but something far, far more difficult, fair and equal treatment of men and women of all races and ethnicities, all variations of gender identities and sexual preferences, all religious affiliations, or no religious affiliation. And here's the tough part, at least for me. The demand is without exception. Get that? Without exception. And imposes itself not only on us as individuals, but also on us as members of a society. A society and a social tradition that lives in the messy midst of a secular world, without false attempts to transcend the world, without attempts to make it less than painful and less than real, using metaphysics or inwardness or prayer or whatever tradition you want to apply to. But that it creates an otherworldly vision of what a church community should be. If we are to imagine or reimagine the beloved community. It is, I think, essential to remember that it isn't something I think or something I'm a member of. It's something that I live, something that I live every day, every single day. A daily dose of living in, as, and through something other than myself. It is a response to the question that I set for myself every day. I sit in meditation most mornings, and my meditations always begin with this question: what is mine to do?